Welcome to Part 4 in our DO-254 Basics series. As I mentioned at the start, it was time to do an update on these valuable introductory presentations. Of all 4 parts, though, this one really needed the most updates, because as you'll see, while DO-254 itself hasn't changed in nearly 25 years, how it's been interpreted and the expectations of its use has changed quite significantly, and this has all been done through other documents. To recap, understanding DO-254 isn't as simple as just reading what's in this document. Numerous other documents influence what is required of DO-254 compliance. These other documents either provide guidance in related disciplines, or they clarify or modify the application of DO-254 itself. I'd like to show this by going back to Figure 1-1, which I touched on earlier in this series. It's a good graphic within the DO-254 document itself that's still pertinent because it shows DO-254 and what's related, but it's not very specific. So I here have added to this diagram. In blue, I'm showing some documents that are tightly related to DO-254, and here in black, I'm adding some significant documents that directly scope, clarify, or redefine DO-254 compliance. So let's go through them one by one. And by the way, it might help to keep Figure 1-1 handy in front of you as I do this. First, in the system space, that area at the top of Figure 1-1, are ARP 4754B and ARP 4761A, which I did mention in an earlier part of this presentation series. Now, what's an ARP, you might be wondering? Well, ARP stands for Aerospace Recommended Practice. It's the naming convention given by SAE, which stands for the Society of Automotive Engineers, which actually covers aerospace too, even though it's not in the name. So this organization has been around for a long time, and like the RTCA, which provides standards to the industry, so does SAE. RTCA documents start with DO, and SAE documents start with ARP. So ARP 4754B provides guidelines for the development of civil aircraft and systems. The systems engineers developing aircraft systems are the ones who hand down those hardware item requirements to the hardware engineers that are complying with DO-254. Then there's ARP 4761A, which provides guidelines and methods for conducting the safety assessment process on civil airborne systems and equipment. The Design or Development Assurance Level, or DAL, that's handed down to the DO-254 program engineers comes from the safety engineers and the analysis that they do on the system that's defined by this document, ARP 4761A. Also note that both of these systems ARP documents were just revised last year in 2023. The next document, which applies to systems and the hardware within it, is DO-160G. Remember, this is a DO document, so this one comes from the RTCA, and it governs the environmental conditions and test procedures for airborne equipment. The hardware design you're developing will ultimately be used in a unique environment, and this standard defines the testing that must be done to ensure that the design can hold up to that environment. This includes things like altitude testing, testing for bird strikes or lightning strikes, vibration testing, temperature testing, that kind of thing. So back to Figure 1-1, if you recall, on the right-hand side was the software domain. As you well know, software and hardware go hand in hand. Often the requirements of one link to the other. And while in the hardware domain you must comply with DO-254, your brethren in the software domain must comply with DO-178C. Now, the documents are not identical, but they are quite similar. DO-178 was actually around first. Its original development occurred in the late 1970s, and its first incarnation was released in 1982. But today, software engineers comply with the C revision, which was published in 2012 and invoked in 2013, and then again with some modifications in 2017. So DO-178C for software came first, and it highly influenced the content in DO-254. While they are similar, DO-178C does have some uniqueness. It actually has 4 supplemental documents that link to and modify it in some cases. The RTCA SC205 committee, when they developed a C version, they realized that there were some additional areas that needed to be expanded upon. And so they created some subcommittees within the larger committee who each in turn developed a supplement to the basic software standard. So there's 4 of these. They are DO-330, that's Software Tool Qualification Considerations. DO-331, Model-Based Development and Verification Supplement to DO-178C and DO-278A. DO-332, Object-Oriented Technology and Related Technical Supplement for DO-178C and DO-278A. And DO-333, Formal Method Supplement to DO-178C and DO-278A. By the way, since I'm mentioning DO-278A, even though I can't say it very well, that one is for ground-based software, in case you were wondering. While not explicitly called out or invoked for use by DO-254, in some cases, when it's pertinent, DO-254 applicants might be pointed at these other documents. For example, if you're developing your design using a model-based approach or formal methods, or if you're trying to qualify a tool for DAL-A, you might be pointed at these supplements by your certification liaison to help assist you. Now let's look back at our diagram again for a moment. Let's look at the documents that directly impact DO-254. Those are the ones I've added in black on the left-hand side, and now I'm going to explain each of them one by one. In my mind, at least, the most important one of these documents is Advisory Circular 20-152A, which is harmonized with the EASA equivalent, AMC 20-152A. By the way, AMC stands for Acceptable Means of Compliance, in case you were wondering. And it's a great way to introduce these documents. Basically, these are the documents that invoke DO-254. They say that following DO-254 is an acceptable means to show compliance to federal regulations that govern the safety of airborne equipment. Now, I mentioned in part 1 of the series that AC 20-152 invoked DO-254 initially in 2005, but it bounded the application to custom microcoded components with hardware designs with assurance levels of A, B, and C. Okay, believe it or not, there was never an EASA equivalent document. So now, just released in late 2022, comes the A version of this document. It's harmonized with Europe on the invocation of DO-254, but it doesn't just say, yeah, use the document. It adds a lot of information. It expands the scope to include commercial off-the-shelf or COTS devices, embedded COTS IP, intellectual property, design cores, and even circuit boards. It actually adds 28 new objectives that you have to comply with. Now, once upon a time, if you design hardware, perhaps you used to be able to find a path around DO-254 compliance, but not anymore. The certification authorities have gotten quite sharp about things, and now the way that the standard is invoked is much more complete. Now, if you're developing hardware designs, you have to comply to some extent or another. I don't have time to go into detail on this document, but it's very important you get your hands on it and read it. And I'll explain how at the end of this presentation. The next document to be aware of is FAA Order 8110.105B. The original version of this came out in 2008, but the latest one was just released this year in 2024. Now, just so you know, orders are documents that the audience is supposed to be the FAA personnel themselves. So this document is an order to the FAA on how to use DO-254 and its related documents to determine compliance of hardware in the context of aircraft and system safety and certification. Now, just because the audience is supposed to be the FAA, don't dismiss the significance of this document. I mean, after all, don't you want to know what the auditors know? Don't you want to be prepared for them and meet their expectations? So find this one, and read it to minimize any surprises when you do get audited. Now here's another interesting document, AC00-72. At the very start of these presentations, I explained that one reason that DO-254 was tricky was because it didn't explain how to be compliant. It didn't give any examples. Well, after many years of hearing these kinds of complaints, the FAA decided to respond, and it did so through ACs with a designation 00. So this is one of several that have this designation. And what this means is 00. It basically means that it's just clarification or examples only. This AC is called Best Practices for Airborne Electronic Hardware Design Assurance using EuroK ED80 and RTCA DO-254. And it provides practical advice and examples for complying with DO-254. Now don't get too excited though. It certainly adds to your body of information, but it just certainly does not tell you everything. It's a step in the right direction though. Another harmonized AC and AMC that was issued in 2022 is AC/AMC 2189. The reason for this was that it was seen time and time again that open problem reports tied to a design at the time of certification could impact other aspects of the system if this information wasn't captured consistently and shared with the right people. Bad things happened over and over again. So AC/AMC 2189 defines a way to manage open problem reports. This is something that must be understood and complied with as part of the DO-254 configuration management supporting process. I note that this document actually applies to hardware, software, and systems development, and it expects all the teams in the whole development chain to comply to avoid open PRs that could affect related upstream or downstream aspects of the design. The final document I'm going to discuss is AC/AMC. By now you've probably come to understand that means it's harmonized between the FAA and EASA. 20-193. This document was also issued in 2024. It's harmonized and it covers the topic of using multi-core processors. It equally affects hardware, software, and systems designs and design decisions. If your hardware if your hardware platform utilizes multi-core processors, you really need to read this AC. You might want to rethink that. It's a tricky one, so make sure you're well versed in it if multi-core processors is something that you're using or considering. Okay, I hope that you now understand that DO-254 compliance goes beyond the RTCA DO-254 document. If there's one takeaway from this part of the presentation, I hope it's that you realize that you need to find all these other documents too. Now, the bad thing is they can be hard to find online. The good thing is that on the airworthinesscert.com site that I've mentioned several times, as part of the free resources has a link to all these documents, or at least the ones that are pertinent and free, which are all the orders and ACs that I mentioned. Now, I'd invite you to visit that site, go to the free stuff, click on Policy Docs, and download all of those, okay? Also, this presentation set was informative, but it really just touched on the very basics. If you want to learn DO-254, you need formal, multi-day training. And there's lots of training classes out there. Just do some Google searches and you'll figure it out. If you don't know where to start though, visit patmoseng.com for live training or airworthinesscert.com for online on-demand training. Those training classes have been vetted and are delivered by professional FAA designees. Also, I talked about planning documents and the extensive documentation required by DO-254, and also the role of process assurance at a very high level. There's a lot of things in DO-254 you have to figure out on your own. Even after being trained, it can feel quite overwhelming, and it is actually. But there are things out there that can help. For example, there are documentation templates that can greatly guide and assist with the documentation requirements of DO-254. There's lots of folks selling templates out there. Take a look. They can range from very basic outlines, which you could probably figure out yourself, to very extensive training tools. For example, the ones sold at airworthinesscert.com are the latter. They're very extensive. I know because I actually worked on them. Me and a team of experts spent literally thousands of hours on them. They're embedded with tons of consulting advice and examples. The templates themselves, just the templates, are over 500 pages long. So that gives you an idea of how daunting the documentation aspects of DO-254 can be. Do you need templates? No, but they can certainly help. The same can be said of checklists. There's so much to keep track of in a DO-254 process, and the role of process assurance can really seem overwhelming. So checklists can guide that role and the team in general as they proceed through the DO-254 program. There's also DO-254 specific tools out there, ones that can help further guide the team, control and share information, support audits, all that kind of stuff. So look around, explore your options, know that there's help out there. Oh, and subscribe to this channel. I promise to do a better job of adding valuable information and keeping the content fresh and updated. And with that, I'd like to wish you good luck with your programs.